All right, now let's implement a basic validation. So here in our validate function, first, I'm going to define an object, errors, set it to an empty object, and then for each input field, we're going to write some validation logic like this. If this.state.account.username, we trim this. Now, if it equals an empty string, we're going to add a property in our errors object. So we said errors.username, we set it to an error message. Username is required. We need to repeat the same logic for the password field. So let's use object destructuring to clean up this code. We pick the account property of this.state and then get rid of this.state here. Now let's duplicate this for the password field. So let's replace both instances of username here with password, and also the error message password is required. But this is a very basic validation. It's not very scalable. So later in this section, I'm going to show you how to replace this implementation with a more flexible and sophisticated one. For now, don't worry about these details. I just want you to understand all these building blocks and how they talk to each other. So for now, we're just checking to see if these input fields have a value. In your application, you might have some complex validation requirements. For example, you may want to check the value of multiple input fields to see if they are valid as a whole. So instead of checking to see if an input field has a value, you can implement your own custom validation rules. Now finally, instead of returning this object here, we should either return null if there are no errors, or this errors object. We can do something like this. Return object.keys. We pass our errors object. This will return an array of all the keys in this object. Now we look at the length property. If it's 0, we're going to return null. Otherwise, we'll return our errors object. Okay? Now to test the application, here in our handle submit, when we call this.validate, right after that, let's do a console.log of errors. Save the changes, back in the browser. So I'm going to submit the form without any values here. This is our errors object. We have two properties, username and password. If I add something for username and submit the form again, now we get a different object. We only have the password property. And finally, if I also fill out the password, now we get null, so there are no errors, and the form is submitted to the server. Beautiful. Next, I will show you how to display these validation errors.